The $5.2 million Koenigsegg Regera sat motionless on the empty highway, smoke billowing from its hood like a dying dragon's last breath. Jonathan Mitchell stepped out of the driver's seat, his designer suit wrinkled and his face twisted in fury. The engine that was supposed to purr with Swedish precision had instead roared with mechanical agony before falling silent forever. "This cannot be happening," Jonathan muttered, pulling out his phone. No signal. Of course. The one stretch of highway where his empire of technology could not reach him, and his prized hypercar had chosen this moment to betray him. He kicked at the gravel, his Italian leather shoes scuffing against the rough stones. 3 hours until the most important business meeting of his life, and he was stranded like some common motorist. The irony was not lost on him, the tech billionaire who had revolutionized communication systems across 3 continents, rendered helpless by a broken car. From beneath a highway overpass 30 feet away, Aaliyah Jackson stirred in her makeshift shelter. She had been sleeping on a pile of cardboard, her few belongings tucked safely in a worn backpack that served as her pillow. The sound of the expensive engine dying had woken her, followed by the unmistakable sounds of someone having the worst day of their life. Aaliyah rubbed her eyes and peered toward the smoking vehicle. She recognized the car immediately, a Koenigsegg, probably worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. The man pacing beside it looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not stranded on a highway with grease-stained asphalt under his feet. She should mind her own business. Rich people had their own solutions to their problems. But something about his desperate movements, the way he kept running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, tugged at something deep inside her. Besides, she knew cars. She knew them better than most people knew their own names. "Hey," Aaliyah called out, emerging from her shelter and walking toward him. "You need help?" Jonathan spun around, his eyes immediately taking in her appearance. Her clothes were clean but obviously second-hand, her shoes held together with tape, and her natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. His expression shifted from surprise to polite dismissal. "Thanks, but I'm fine," he said, turning back to his phone as if she had already disappeared. "I'm waiting for my mechanic to call me back." Aaliyah stopped a few feet from the car, her trained eye already assessing the situation. The smoke pattern, the scent in the air, the way the engine had sounded before it died, she had seen this before. "Your cooling system failed," she said matter-of-factly. "Probably a cascade effect that took out your turbocharger seals. That's why you're getting all that smoke." The engine seized up to protect itself from total destruction. Jonathan froze, his phone halfway to his ear. He slowly turned to face her, his eyebrows raised. "What did you just say?" "Your car. I know what's wrong with it." Aaliyah stepped closer, noting how he instinctively moved to block her path to his precious vehicle. "The good news is it's probably not as bad as it looks. The bad news is you're not going anywhere until someone fixes it. And you think you can diagnose a Koenigsegg Regera by listening to it die?" The skepticism in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I don't think anything." "I know." Aaliyah crossed her arms, meeting his gaze steadily. "I also know that your mechanic isn't going to make it out here for hours, and even if he does, he probably won't have the right parts with him. This isn't exactly a common breakdown." Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, his mind racing. Everything about this situation went against his instincts. He didn't accept help from strangers, especially not from someone who looked like she needed help more than she could provide it. But something in her voice, the confidence with which she had diagnosed his car, made him hesitate. "You're homeless," he said, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. Very observant. Aaliyah's voice carried no shame, no defensiveness. "And you're rich. What's your point?" "My point is that this car costs more than most houses. Something goes wrong. Something already went wrong. That's why we're having this conversation." Aaliyah gestured toward the smoking hood. "Look, I get it. You don't know me from anyone. But I'm telling you right now that I can fix your car, and I can do it in the next 2 hours if you let me try." The absurdity of the situation hit Jonathan like a physical force. Here he was, a man who commanded boardrooms full of brilliant minds, being offered automotive advice by a homeless woman on the side of a highway. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to wait for his mechanic, to maintain the proper order of things. But the clock on his phone showed him exactly how little time he had left. His meeting with the Japanese investors was not something he could reschedule. 3 years of negotiations hung in the balance, along with a deal that would expand his company into markets he had only dreamed of reaching. Have you ever wondered what happens when pride meets desperation on an empty highway? When someone's entire world can be saved or destroyed by the decision to accept help from the most unexpected source. Subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you trust a stranger with something worth more than most people's entire lives? What exactly are you proposing? Jonathan asked, his voice carefully controlled. Let me look under the hood. Give me access to whatever tools you have in the trunk. If I can't fix it, you're no worse off than you are right now. If I can fix it, you get to your meeting on time and your car doesn't need a full engine rebuild. Jonathan looked at his phone again. No signal, no callback from his mechanic, and time slipping away like sand through his fingers. He thought about the years of work that had led to this moment, the investors who were flying in specifically to meet with him, the empire he had built that could crumble if this one deal fell through. If you damage anything. I won't, Aaliyah interrupted. But we're wasting time talking about it. Every minute we stand here arguing is a minute I could be fixing your car. Jonathan studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. Instead, he found only calm confidence and an odd sort of patience, as if she was used to people taking their time to trust her. There was something else there too, something that reminded him of himself when he was pitching his first startup to skeptical investors. The look of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of, even if no one else believed it yet. Against every instinct he had developed in his years of business, against every lesson about risk management and due diligence, Jonathan nodded. Okay, he said. Fix my car. Aaliyah walked around the Koenigsegg with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. Her hands moved carefully along the car's surfaces, not quite touching but close enough to feel the heat still radiating from the engine bay. Jonathan watched her every movement, torn between fascination and terror at what he had just agreed to. Pop the hood, Aaliyah said, pulling a small LED flashlight from her backpack. And I'm going to need you to open the trunk. Most high-end cars keep basic tools back there, even if the owners never use them. Jonathan pressed the hood release, and the front of the car lifted with a soft hydraulic whisper. The engine bay, normally a showcase of Swedish engineering precision, looked like a war zone. Cables and hoses snaked between components that gleamed with expensive alloys, but everything was now coated with a fine layer of oil and coolant residue. Oh, you beautiful disaster, Aaliyah murmured, shining her light into the depths of the engine. Tell me your secrets. You talk to cars? Jonathan asked, retrieving a small toolkit from the trunk. It looked pathetically inadequate for the task at hand. All the time. They're better listeners than most people. Aaliyah accepted the tools without looking at them, her attention completely absorbed by the engine. See this here? Your primary coolant line developed a pinhole leak. Probably been building pressure for weeks, but you wouldn't have noticed because the leak was so small. She pointed to a barely visible stain on one of the hoses. Jonathan leaned closer, squinting to see what she was indicating. The leak caused your coolant levels to drop gradually, she continued, her hands now working with practiced efficiency to remove access panels. When the system finally couldn't maintain proper temperature, your turbochargers started running hot. The seals failed, which is where all that smoke came from. Your engine computer shut everything down before permanent damage could occur. How do you know all this? Jonathan found himself genuinely curious, his initial skepticism giving way to amazement as she systematically disassembled parts of his engine with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. I have a degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech, Aaliyah said, not looking up from her work. Graduated summa cum laude if that matters to you. I also spent 3 years working for a racing team before life happened. She paused in her work for just a moment, and Jonathan caught something in her expression that suggested there was much more to that story. But before he could ask, she had returned to the engine, her hands moving with surgical precision. The good news is that I can fix the coolant leak with what we have here, she said, pulling what looked like a tube of specialized adhesive from the tool kit. This stuff is designed for temporary repairs on high-performance engines. It won't win any beauty contests, but it'll hold until you can get to a proper shop. And the turbochargers? That's where it gets interesting. Aaliyah's voice carried a note of professional excitement that reminded Jonathan of his best engineers when they were solving complex problems. The seals failed, but they failed safely. We can reset the system and run it in limited mode. You'll lose about 30% of your power, but the car will get you where you need to go. Jonathan watched her work, noting the way her hands moved with absolute certainty. There was no fumbling, no trial and error. Every action was deliberate and informed by knowledge that ran deeper than mere technical training. This was someone who understood machines not just intellectually but intuitively. Where did you learn to work on cars like this? He asked. My grandfather owned a garage in Atlanta, Aaliyah replied, carefully applying the repair compound to the damaged coolant line. Started taking apart engines when I was 8 years old. He said I had gifted hands and a mind that could see how things fit together. Turns out he was right. So what happened? How did you end up? Jonathan gestured vaguely, unable to finish the question with any degree of politeness. Aaliyah looked up from the engine for the first time since she had started working. Her expression was neither defensive nor sad, just matter-of-fact in a way that suggested she had made peace with her circumstances. Life happened, she said simply. Sometimes you make all the right choices and still lose everything. Sometimes the system fails you before you get a chance to fail it. And sometimes you just run out of options and have to make do with what's left. There was no self-pity in her voice, no attempt to elicit sympathy. She stated the facts of her situation with the same clinical detachment she had used to diagnose his car. Jonathan found himself more moved by her lack of drama than he would have been by tears or anger. "Hand me that wrench," she said, pointing to a specific tool in the kit. "The one with the blue handle. We're going to need to reset the turbo system manually." Jonathan complied, finding himself oddly honored to be assisting her. In boardrooms and conference calls, he was the one giving orders, the one with all the answers. Here, on the side of a highway with grease under his fingernails, he was simply another pair of hands helping someone far more qualified than himself. "You know," he said as she worked, "most people would have asked for money up front. Or at least some kind of guarantee about payment." Aaliyah paused in her work and looked at him with an expression that might have been amusement. "Are you planning to stiff me on the bill?" "No, of course not. I just meant." "I know what you meant." She returned to the engine, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been compassion. "You're not used to people helping you without wanting something in return. Must be lonely thinking everyone has an angle." The observation hit closer to home than Jonathan cared to admit. In his world, every interaction was a transaction, every relationship a negotiation. The idea of someone offering help simply because they could, without calculating the potential return on investment, was so foreign to his experience that he genuinely didn't know how to process it. "There," Aaliyah said, straightening up and wiping her hands on a rag she had produced from somewhere. "Start her up." Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then slid into the driver's seat. The leather was still warm from the sun, and everything looked exactly as it had when he had parked the car. But somehow, everything felt different. He turned the key and the engine came to life with a sound that was both familiar and new. It was quieter than before, missing some of the aggressive growl that had made the car feel like a caged predator, but it was running. Smooth, steady, reliable. "How does it feel?" Aaliyah called out over the engine noise. "Like a miracle," Jonathan replied and meant it. Jonathan stepped out of the car, leaving the engine running as if afraid that turning it off might break the spell. The sound was different, more subdued, lacking the full-throated roar that had originally attracted him to the Koenigsegg, but it was the most beautiful sound he had heard all day. "I cannot believe you just did that," he said, staring at Aaliyah as if she had just performed actual magic. "How long did that take?" 45 minutes? 52 minutes, Aaliyah corrected, checking the time on an old digital watch that looked like it had survived several wars. "Could have been faster if I'd had proper tools, but we made do." She was already cleaning up, returning tools to their proper places in the kit with the same methodical precision she had shown while working. Jonathan noticed that she left the engine bay cleaner than she had found it, despite having performed emergency surgery on his car's most complex systems. "I need to pay you," Jonathan said, reaching for his wallet. "What do I owe you for this?" "Nothing," Aaliyah replied, closing the hood with a gentle thud. "You needed help. I could provide it. That's enough." Jonathan stared at her, his wallet still in his hand. In his world, everything had a price. Every service came with an invoice. The idea of someone refusing payment for skilled work was so completely outside his experience that he honestly didn't know how to respond. "I can't just let you work on my car for free," he protested. "This is skilled labor. Professional-level repair work. You saved me thousands of dollars and probably saved my business deal too. Then consider it my good deed for the year," Aaliyah said, shouldering her backpack. "Drive carefully. That repair will hold, but don't push the engine too hard until you can get it properly serviced." She turned to walk back toward her makeshift shelter, but Jonathan stepped into her path. "Wait," he said, then paused, not quite sure what he wanted to say. "I mean, you can't just, this doesn't make sense." "What doesn't make sense?" Aaliyah asked, tilting her head slightly as she looked at him. "Any of this. You're living under a bridge, but you have an engineering degree from Georgia Tech. You can diagnose and repair a $5 million hypercar with basic tools, but you're..." He gestured helplessly, unable to complete the thought without sounding insulting. But I'm homeless, Aaliyah finished for him. Yeah, that's the part that doesn't fit your worldview, isn't it? Smart people are supposed to be successful. Talented people are supposed to be wealthy. If someone is sleeping under a bridge, they must have done something to deserve it. Her voice held no accusation, just a tired understanding of how the world worked and how people thought about it. Jonathan felt heat rise in his cheeks, recognizing the truth of what she was saying about his assumptions. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. And you're not wrong to think it's unusual. Aaliyah set her backpack down and sat on the concrete barrier that ran along the highway, patting the space next to her in invitation. Want to hear the story? Jonathan glanced at his phone. He had an hour and a half to make his meeting, which was cutting it close but doable thanks to Aaliyah's work. And despite every instinct telling him to get in his car and drive away, he found himself sitting down beside her. My family owned a small manufacturing business in Atlanta, Aaliyah began, her eyes focused on the horizon rather than on him. Nothing fancy, but we made specialized parts for racing teams and custom car builders. My grandfather started it, my father expanded it, and I was supposed to take it over someday. What happened? The recession hit us hard, but we survived that. What killed us was a lawsuit. Her voice remained steady, but Jonathan caught the tightness around her eyes. One of our parts allegedly failed in a racing accident. The driver was seriously injured and his team sued us for everything we had. Allegedly? The part didn't fail. Independent testing proved that. But proving your innocence in court costs money, and we didn't have enough to fight a team of corporate lawyers who could drag things out for years. Aaliyah picked up a small stone and turned it over in her hands. We settled out of court, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and lost everything. Jonathan felt something twist in his stomach. He knew that game had played it himself from the other side. The way deep-pocketed companies could use the legal system as a weapon, forcing smaller competitors into submission not through superior arguments but through superior resources. The house, the business, my college fund, all of it went to pay the settlement and the legal fees, Aaliyah continued. My father had a heart attack 6 months later. Stress, the doctor said. My mother couldn't handle losing him and losing everything else at the same time. She started drinking, and that was pretty much the end of our family as I knew it. What about you? I finished college on loans and scholarships, got my degree and tried to start over. But the legal settlement included a clause that prevented me from working in the automotive industry for 5 years. And it turns out that when potential employers run background checks and see that you were involved in a major lawsuit, they start to wonder if you're worth the risk. Aaliyah tossed the stone away and looked directly at Jonathan for the first time since she had started talking. So here I am. 3 years out of college, $90,000 in student debt, no family, no references who will return my calls, and no legal way to work in the field I trained for. Sleeping under bridges and fixing broken cars for free because it's the only way I can remember who I used to be. The silence stretched between them, filled with the steady rumble of the Koenigsegg's engine and the distant sound of traffic on other highways. Jonathan found himself thinking about all the assumptions he had made, not just about Aaliyah but about homelessness in general. How easy it was to believe that people got what they deserved, that success and failure were simple measures of worth and effort. When does the non-compete clause expire? He asked finally. 18 months, Aaliyah replied. Not that it matters much. 5 years out of the industry might as well be 50 in terms of keeping up with current technology. What if I told you that wasn't necessarily true? Something in his tone made her look at him more sharply. What do you mean? Jonathan pulled out his business card and handed it to her. She looked at it for a moment, her eyebrows rising as she read the company name and his title. Mitchell Technologies, she said slowly. You're the Jonathan Mitchell. The guy who revolutionized data compression algorithms. The one who built the communication systems that half the world's internet runs on. Guilty as charged. Jonathan found himself smiling, pleased that she recognized his work. And I'm always looking for engineers who can think outside the box, who can solve problems in ways that other people can't even imagine. Aaliyah stared at the card, then at him, then back at the card. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance, Jonathan said. Come work for me. I'll pay off your student loans, get you back on your feet, and give you projects that will challenge everything you think you know about engineering. All you have to do is say yes. Just like that. Aaliyah's voice carried a note of disbelief. You don't even know what kind of worker I am. You've never seen my resume, never checked my references. I just watched you diagnose and repair a hybrid turbo system with $50 worth of tools and no service manual, Jonathan pointed out. I think I have a pretty good idea of what kind of worker you are. Aaliyah looked down at the business card again, and Jonathan could practically see her mind working through the implications, the possibilities, the risks. When she looked up at him again, her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for someone you just met?" Jonathan considered the question seriously, trying to understand his own motivations. Part of it was guilt. He knew guilt over the assumptions he had made, over the comfortable certainty of his worldview that had just been shattered. Part of it was practical business sense. Talent like hers was rare, and he had learned long ago to grab it wherever he found it. But there was something else, something harder to define. Something about the way she had approached his problem with complete confidence, the way she had refused payment, the way she had told her story without self-pity or blame. Something about the person she had remained despite everything that had been taken from her. "Because," he said finally, "I think you're exactly the kind of person who can help me change the world." Aaliyah held the business card between her fingers as if it might dissolve at any moment. 3 years of living on the margins had taught her to be suspicious of good fortune, to look for the catch in every generous offer. But as she studied Jonathan's face, she saw only sincerity and what looked like genuine excitement. "I need you to understand something," she said carefully. "I haven't worked in a corporate environment since college internships. I don't have professional clothes, I don't have an address for tax purposes, and I probably smell like highway dust and engine oil. All fixable problems," Jonathan replied without hesitation. "What I can't fix is a lack of talent or vision, and you've already proven you have both in abundance." Aaliyah stood up and walked a few steps toward his car, her mind racing through possibilities and obstacles in equal measure. She had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, had imagined what it would feel like to have someone recognize her abilities and offer her a chance to use them. Now that it was actually happening, she found herself almost paralyzed by the magnitude of the opportunity. "What kind of work would I be doing?" she asked, turning back to face him. "I'm developing next-generation electric vehicle technologies," Jonathan said, his voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone talking about his passion. "Battery systems, motor controllers, regenerative braking, thermal management. The kind of advanced engineering that's going to define transportation for the next 50 years. And you think I can contribute to that? I think you can revolutionize it." Jonathan stood up and joined her beside the car. "Most of my engineers are brilliant, but they think inside established parameters. They solve problems by applying known solutions in predictable ways. You just solved a problem by seeing connections that shouldn't exist and making repairs that shouldn't work but do anyway." Aaliyah felt something flutter in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten after years of rejection and disappointment. It was the feeling of being valued, of having someone see potential in her that extended beyond her current circumstances. "I can't pay you back right away," she said, thinking about the offer to clear her student loans. "I mean, whatever salary you're thinking of paying me, it's going to take years to—" "I'm not looking for you to pay me back," Jonathan interrupted. "I'm looking for you to pay it forward. Build something amazing, teach other people, make the world a little better than you found it. That's the only return on investment I'm interested in." The sincerity in his voice was almost overwhelming. Aaliyah had become so accustomed to people viewing her as a problem to be solved or avoided that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as an asset, as someone with something valuable to contribute. "There's one more thing," she said, and this time her voice carried a note of vulnerability that surprised her. "I've been homeless for 8 months. I've been turned down for jobs, denied housing applications, treated like I'm invisible or dangerous. I'm not the same person I was when I graduated from college. I don't know if I remember how to be that person." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not trying to hire the person you used to be," he said. "I'm trying to hire the person you are right now. The person who saw someone in trouble and offered to help. The person who fixed an impossible problem with inadequate tools. The person who survived 3 years of hardship and still managed to keep her skills sharp and her integrity intact." Aaliyah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back. She had cried enough tears over the past few years, had grieved for her old life until the grief had worn itself out. This wasn't a time for looking backward. "Okay," she said, the word coming out stronger than she had expected. "Yes, I accept your offer." Jonathan's face broke into a grin that transformed his entire appearance. The serious, intense businessman disappeared, replaced by someone who looked genuinely delighted by her response. "Excellent," he said, pulling out his phone. "First things first, we need to get you set up with temporary housing. I know a company that provides furnished corporate apartments for executives in transition. Clean, safe, fully equipped, and available immediately. I can't afford company expense, Jonathan said firmly. Consider it part of your benefits package. You'll need a stable address to get your new employee paperwork processed anyway. He was already making calls, speaking in the rapid-fire manner of someone accustomed to getting things done quickly and efficiently. Aaliyah listened to him arrange her apartment, her employee ID processing, and what sounded like an immediate cash advance to cover her basic needs until her first paycheck. This is happening very fast, she said when he ended the last call. I don't believe in letting good opportunities slip away, Jonathan replied. Besides, I have a project that could really use your input, and I'd like to get you started as soon as possible. What kind of project? An electric motor design that's been giving my team trouble for 6 months. High efficiency, compact form factor, suitable for everything from scooters to heavy trucks. We keep running into thermal management issues that nobody can solve. Aaliyah felt her engineering instincts kick in immediately. What kind of cooling system are you using? Traditional liquid cooling with radiator arrays. It works, but it's heavy and complex and it takes up too much space for smaller applications. Have you considered phase change cooling? The question came out before Aaliyah had consciously decided to ask it. Using the motor's own magnetic fields to circulate coolant through microchannels in the housing? Jonathan stared at her. Is that possible? Theoretically, yes. You'd need to design the motor housing as part of the cooling system instead of treating cooling as an add-on component. It would be more complex to manufacture, but much more efficient and compact. Aaliyah paused, realizing she had just started problem-solving a project she knew almost nothing about. Of course, I'd need to see your current designs to know if it's actually feasible. You'll see them Monday morning, Jonathan said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was already envisioning the possibilities. Along with anything else you want to examine. Full access to all our research and development projects. The magnitude of what was happening finally hit Aaliyah with full force. This morning she had woken up under a bridge with no prospects and no hope for change. Now she was standing beside a $5 million car, talking about cutting-edge engineering projects with one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country who had just offered her a job and a new life. I need to ask you one more question, she said, looking directly at him. Why aren't you worried about the background check? When you run my credit and employment history, you're going to see the lawsuit, the settlement, the gaps in employment. Most employers see those things as red flags. Most employers don't have their cars fixed by homeless engineers, Jonathan replied. Look, I've built my entire career on recognizing talent that other people overlook or undervalue. The best programmers I know are college dropouts who learn to code in their bedrooms. The best designers I know are people who see the world differently than everyone else. The best problem solvers are usually people who've had to solve their own impossible problems first. He gestured toward the still-running Koenigsegg. You just proved that you can take a catastrophic failure and turn it into a working solution with limited resources and no preparation. That tells me everything I need to know about your abilities and your character. Aaliyah nodded slowly, feeling something she had almost forgotten. The sense that the future held possibilities instead of just more of the same struggles. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what her life might look like if things actually worked out. When do I start? She asked. How about right now? Jonathan said, gesturing toward the passenger seat of his car. I'm heading to my office for that meeting I mentioned. You can come with me, see the facilities, meet some of the team. Consider it your unofficial first day. Aaliyah looked down at her clothes, then back at him. I'm not exactly dressed for a business meeting. The meeting isn't until later, and I have a feeling my engineers are going to be much more interested in your ideas than your outfit. Jonathan opened the passenger door and waited. Besides, some of my best people do their most creative work in jeans and sneakers. Aaliyah picked up her backpack and walked toward the car, pausing at the open door. The leather interior looked pristine and expensive, a far cry from the cardboard and concrete she had been sleeping on just hours before. But Jonathan waited patiently, making no move to rush her or express any concern about her appearance. She slid into the passenger seat and he closed the door gently behind her. As they pulled onto the highway, Aaliyah watched the landscape blur past the window and tried to process the surreal turn her life had just taken. The car rode smoothly despite the emergency repairs, a testament to both Swedish engineering and her own mechanical skills. There's something else I want you to think about, Jonathan said as they drove. Eventually, when you're ready, I'd like you to consider leading a special initiative I've been planning. A program to identify and nurture overlooked talent in engineering and technology. What do you mean? I mean people like you. Brilliant minds who've been passed over by traditional hiring processes, who've fallen through the cracks of the system, who have incredible potential but lack opportunities. Jonathan glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. I want to build a program that finds these people and gives them the resources and support they need to succeed. Aaliyah felt her breath catch. The idea was beautiful in its simplicity and radical in its implications. You're talking about fundamentally changing how talent is identified and developed. Exactly. And I can't think of anyone better qualified to lead that effort than someone who's experienced both sides of the system firsthand. As they approached the city, Aaliyah saw the Mitchell Technologies building rising ahead of them, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the clouds. In a few minutes she would walk through those doors not as a desperate job seeker, but as a new employee with the full backing of one of the most innovative companies in the world. The girl who had woken up under a bridge that morning was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone with purpose, potential, and hope. Thank you, she said softly, the words carrying all the gratitude she couldn't quite express. Thank you, Jonathan replied, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. I have a feeling you're going to change everything. 6 weeks later, Aaliyah stood in the advanced engineering lab of Mitchell Technologies, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and computer screens displaying complex 3D models. The transformation in her life had been so complete that sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. The furnished apartment Jonathan had arranged had become her sanctuary, a place where she could think and dream and plan without worrying about where her next meal would come from. The corporate wardrobe he had insisted the company provide made her feel professional and confident. But most importantly, the work itself had awakened a part of her that had been dormant for years. The thermal efficiency numbers don't lie, she said to the small group of engineers gathered around her workstation. By integrating the cooling system directly into the motor housing design, we've increased power density by 37% while reducing overall weight by 22%. Thomas Chin, the senior mechanical engineer who had been working on the project before Aaliyah arrived, frowned at the data on her screen. Those numbers seem too good to be true. What's the catch? The catch is manufacturing complexity, Aaliyah admitted. We're essentially creating a motor housing that functions as a heat exchanger at the microscopic level. The tooling requirements alone are going to be expensive. How expensive? Asked Rebecca Torres, the project manager who had initially been skeptical of bringing an unknown engineer onto such a critical project. Aaliyah pulled up another screen showing cost projections. Initial estimates suggest about 40% higher manufacturing costs per unit. But the improved performance means we can use smaller, lighter motors for the same applications, which reduces material costs and shipping expenses. Overall, we're looking at roughly 15% higher total cost for a product that performs 60% better than current designs. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Thomas was the first to speak, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging admiration. If these projections hold up in real-world testing, he said slowly, this could revolutionize the entire electric motor industry. When can we build a prototype? Rebecca asked, her project manager instincts already shifting into high gear. I've been working on that, Aaliyah said, pulling up detailed manufacturing specifications. We can have a test unit ready in 3 weeks if we use the rapid prototyping lab and bring in some specialized machining equipment. She had been working 12-hour days since her second week at the company, not because anyone required it but because she couldn't stop herself. After years of intellectual starvation, having access to unlimited resources and challenging problems was like being given a feast after a long famine. Aaliyah, came Jonathan's voice from the lab entrance. Could I speak with you for a moment? She looked up to see him standing in the doorway, wearing his usual expression of focused intensity but with something else underneath it that she couldn't quite identify. Pride, maybe, or satisfaction. Of course, she said, saving her work and following him out into the hallway. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached his office, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the city skyline. Aaliyah still felt a small thrill every time she entered this space, remembering the first time she had seen it and how impossibly distant such success had seemed from her perspective under the bridge. I just got off a call with our patent attorney, Jonathan said, settling into his chair and gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. Your motor cooling design is unlike anything currently in existence. We're looking at potentially dozens of patent applications, covering everything from the basic concept to specific manufacturing processes. That's good news, right? Aaliyah asked, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. It's excellent news. It's also attracted attention from some major automotive companies who are very interested in licensing your technology. Jonathan leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Aaliyah, I need you to understand something. What you've developed in 6 weeks is the kind of breakthrough that most engineers spend entire careers hoping to achieve. The applications extend far beyond what we originally envisioned. What do you mean? I mean, we're talking about technology that could be used in everything from electric bicycles to cargo ships. The scalability of your design means it has potential applications across every transportation sector that uses electric motors. Jonathan pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk to her. These are preliminary licensing inquiries from companies representing billions of dollars in annual revenue. Aaliyah opened the folder and felt her eyes widen as she saw the names on the letterhead. Major automakers, aerospace companies, shipping conglomerates, and manufacturers she had only dreamed of working with during her college years. What does this mean for me? She asked, still trying to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. It means you're about to become one of the most sought-after engineers in the world, Jonathan said with a smile. It also means we need to talk about your future here at Mitchell Technologies and what role you want to play in developing this technology further. Before Aaliyah could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Jonathan called for whoever it was to enter, and Thomas Chen stepped into the office looking slightly out of breath. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but I thought you should know that the preliminary test results from the prototype are even better than Aaliyah's projections. We're seeing performance improvements that exceed our most optimistic expectations. Jonathan looked at Aaliyah with an expression that mixed professional admiration with something that looked almost like affection. It seems your impact on this company is accelerating. After Thomas left, they sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the implications of what was happening. Aaliyah found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment, the unlikely series of events that had transformed her from a homeless woman fixing cars on the highway to an engineer whose work was being courted by industry giants. There's something I want to ask you, Jonathan said finally, and I want you to know that there's no wrong answer to this question. What is it? Are you happy here? I mean, genuinely happy with the work, with the environment, with the direction your career is taking. Aaliyah considered the question seriously. The work was challenging and fulfilling in ways she had forgotten were possible. Her colleagues had moved past their initial skepticism to genuine respect and collaboration. The financial security allowed her to focus entirely on engineering without the constant stress of survival that had dominated her life for so long. But there was something else, something she hadn't expected when she first accepted Jonathan's offer. She had developed a deep appreciation not just for the opportunities he had given her, but for the person he had revealed himself to be. His integrity, his willingness to take risks on people others overlooked, his genuine excitement about innovation and progress. I'm not just happy, she said finally. I'm grateful in ways I don't think I can adequately express. You didn't just give me a job, Jonathan. You gave me back my sense of purpose, my confidence in my abilities, my belief that the future could be better than the past. Good, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. Because I have a proposition for you that goes beyond just being an employee of this company. What kind of proposition? I want you to become a partner. Not just in this project but in the company itself. A full equity stake, leadership responsibilities, and a say in the strategic direction we take. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her reaction carefully. I want you to help me build something that changes how the world thinks about talent, innovation, and opportunity. Aaliyah felt her heart begin to race. Partnership meant more than just career advancement, it meant becoming part of something larger than herself, something that could have lasting impact on industries and lives. But it also meant stepping fully into a world she had once been excluded from, taking on responsibilities that would put her in the public eye and make her a target for the kind of scrutiny she had learned to avoid. What would you do if someone offered you not just a job, but a chance to reshape an entire industry? If you're enjoying this transformation, subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think Aaliyah should do next. I need some time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Jonathan stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city below. But while you're thinking, I want you to remember something. You've already proven that you can take broken things and make them better than they were before. Maybe it's time to think about what else in this world could use that kind of attention. 3 weeks later, Aaliyah found herself working late in the lab again, but this time she wasn't alone. Jonathan sat at the workstation beside hers, his sleeves rolled up and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. They had been collaborating on the prototype testing for the past several hours, and what had started as a professional consultation had evolved into something that felt almost like a partnership already. "Run the thermal stress test one more time," Jonathan said, leaning closer to her screen to examine the data curves. "I want to make sure we're not missing anything in the high-temperature performance range." Aaliyah initiated the test sequence and watched as the computer model put their design through simulated conditions that would destroy most conventional motors. The numbers that appeared on screen made both of them sit back in amazement. "That can't be right," she murmured, checking the parameters to make sure they hadn't made an error. "According to this, our motor actually becomes more efficient as temperature increases, up to about 200 degrees Celsius. Is that possible?" "Theoretically, yes. The thermal expansion of the housing materials actually optimizes the coolant flow patterns at higher temperatures." Aaliyah pulled up a cross-sectional view of the motor design, highlighting the intricate network of cooling channels. "It's like the motor is self-optimizing based on operating conditions." Jonathan shook his head in wonder. "6 months ago, my best engineers were telling me that thermal management would always be the limiting factor in electric motor design. Now you're showing me a motor that gets better at managing heat the more heat it has to manage." "Sometimes the best solutions come from approaching problems differently than everyone else," Aaliyah said, then paused as she realized the parallels to her own situation. "Like hiring someone based on what they can do rather than what their resume says they should be able to do." Their eyes met across the workspace, and Aaliyah felt something shift in the atmosphere between them. Over the past 2 months, their professional relationship had deepened into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared excitement about their work. But now, in the quiet lab with city lights twinkling through the windows, she was aware of something else. "You know," Jonathan said softly, "I've been thinking about that day on the highway. About how you were so confident that you could fix something everyone else would have written off as a total loss. I told you I just know cars." "No, it was more than that." Jonathan turned his chair to face her directly. "You saw potential where everyone else saw disaster. You were willing to take responsibility for an outcome that most people would have been afraid to attempt." Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken. They were still talking about engineering, but somehow it felt like they were talking about much more than that. "Maybe I just had nothing to lose," she said quietly. "When you're already at rock bottom, taking risks doesn't seem as scary." "But you're not at rock bottom anymore," Jonathan pointed out. "You have a career, financial security, a future full of possibilities. And you're still taking risks, still pushing boundaries, still refusing to accept that things have to be the way they've always been." The observation hung in the air between them, laden with implications that neither of them was quite ready to voice directly. Aaliyah found herself studying his face, noting details she had never paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was concentrating. The small scar on his chin that spoke of some childhood adventure. The way he listened with complete attention when she was explaining a concept, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. "Jonathan," she began, then stopped, not sure how to continue. "What is it?" "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always. Am I here because you feel sorry for me?" The question came out in a rush, as if she had been holding it back for weeks. "Because you wanted to save the homeless girl and prove something about your own character?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, and Aaliyah felt her stomach drop. She had been dreading this conversation but knew it was necessary. The success she had achieved, the partnership offer, even the way he was looking at her now, she needed to know if any of it was real or if it was all based on pity and guilt. "Do you want the diplomatic answer or the complete truth?" he asked finally. "The complete truth. The complete truth is that when I first offered you a job, part of my motivation was guilt. I was ashamed of the assumptions I had made about you, and I wanted to prove to myself that I was better than my initial prejudices." Jonathan paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "But that lasted about 48 hours. What happened after 48 hours? I realized that you weren't just talented, you were extraordinary. Not because of what you had overcome, but because of what you were capable of creating. The motor design, the innovative approaches to problems my team had been struggling with for months, the way you could see connections that no one else could see." He leaned forward slightly, his voice growing more intense. "Aaliyah, you're here because you're brilliant. You're here because you make this company better. You're here because working with you has been one of the most intellectually stimulating experiences of my career. And now," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "now I'm starting to think that professional admiration isn't the only reason I look forward to our late-night work sessions." The admission settled between them like a bridge being built, connecting territories that had been separate until this moment. Aaliyah felt her breath catch as she recognized her own feelings reflected in his words. "This is complicated," she said finally. "Why?" "Because you're my boss. Because there's a power dynamic here that could make things difficult. Because I don't want anyone to think that my success is based on anything other than my work." Jonathan nodded slowly, understanding the complexity of her position. "You're right. It is complicated. But can I tell you what I think?" "Please." "I think that two adults who respect each other, who bring out the best in each other professionally and personally, who share the same values and the same vision for the future, I think they should be allowed to explore what that connection might become, regardless of how they met or what their professional relationship looks like." Aaliyah felt something warm spread through her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten after years of focusing solely on survival. It was hope, but not the desperate kind that had sustained her during her darkest moments. This was the kind of hope that came from recognizing genuine possibility, from seeing a future that could be even better than the present. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting that we acknowledge what's happening between us and see where it leads," Jonathan said, reaching across the space between their chairs to take her hand. "I'm suggesting that maybe the best partnerships aren't just professional." His hand was warm and steady, and Aaliyah found herself thinking about all the hands that had been extended to her over the years. Most had come with conditions, expectations, or ulterior motives. But Jonathan's touch felt different, supportive rather than possessive, encouraging rather than demanding. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said, not pulling her hand away but needing to be completely transparent. "I've been thinking about your partnership offer. And I want to say yes. Not just because of the professional opportunities, but because I believe in what you're trying to build here. The program to identify overlooked talent, the commitment to innovation over convention, the idea that a company can be successful while also making the world better." Aaliyah paused, gathering her courage. "And I want to say yes because I can't imagine a professional future that doesn't include working closely with you." Jonathan's smile was radiant. "Is that a yes to the partnership or a yes to something more than partnership?" "Both," Aaliyah said, and was surprised by how certain she sounded. "Both, definitely both." The conference room at Mitchell Technologies buzzed with excitement as Aaliyah connected her laptop to the presentation system. 6 months had passed since that late-night conversation in the lab, and the motor technology she had developed was ready for its debut to the wider world. But more than that, the partnership between her and Jonathan, both professional and personal, had grown into something neither of them had expected. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan said to the assembled group of engineers, investors, and automotive industry representatives, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Aaliyah Jackson, our new Chief Innovation Officer and the brilliant mind behind the technology you're about to see." Aaliyah felt a flutter of nerves mixed with pride as she looked out at the audience. The title was new, earned through months of groundbreaking work that had expanded far beyond the original motor design. Her integrated cooling system had led to breakthroughs in battery thermal management, charging infrastructure, and even renewable energy storage systems. 6 months ago," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "we were facing what seemed like an insurmountable problem. How do you create electric motors that are powerful enough for heavy-duty applications, efficient enough for long-range transportation, and compact enough for urban mobility solutions?" She clicked to her first slide, showing the traditional approach to motor cooling that had limited the industry for decades. The conventional wisdom said you had to choose power, efficiency, or size. Pick two because you couldn't have all three. Another click brought up her revolutionary design. "We decided to reject that conventional wisdom and ask a different question. What if the cooling system wasn't a separate component, but an integrated part of the motor's core functionality?" As she walked through the technical details, Aaliyah could see the audience's growing excitement. These were people who understood the implications of what she was showing them, who could recognize a paradigm shift when they saw one. "The results speak for themselves," she continued, displaying performance data that drew audible gasps from several audience members. 40% increase in power density, 30% improvement in efficiency, and a 25% reduction in overall system weight. From the back of the room, Jonathan watched with unconcealed pride as Aaliyah commanded the attention of some of the most influential people in the automotive industry. The transformation from the woman he had met on the highway was complete, but not in the way he had originally imagined. She hadn't simply been restored to who she was before, she had become someone entirely new, someone who combined the technical brilliance she had always possessed with the wisdom and resilience she had gained through hardship. "Dr. Jackson," came a voice from the audience, "what are the manufacturing implications of this design? Can it be produced at scale?" "That's an excellent question," Aaliyah replied, advancing to her next slide. We've been working closely with advanced manufacturing partners to develop production processes that make this technology commercially viable. The initial investment is significant, but the long-term benefits justify the costs. She explained the partnership agreements they had negotiated, the pilot production facilities they had established, and the timeline for bringing the technology to market. Every answer demonstrated not just technical expertise, but the kind of business acumen that comes from understanding both the possibilities and the practical constraints of innovation. We're not just talking about incremental improvement, she concluded. We're talking about technology that could accelerate the global transition to electric transportation by decades. Every application from personal mobility to freight shipping becomes more efficient, more affordable, and more environmentally sustainable. The applause that followed was enthusiastic and sustained. As the formal presentation ended and people began to mingle, Aaliyah found herself surrounded by engineers and executives eager to discuss technical details and potential applications. Jonathan eventually made his way through the crowd to reach her side, arriving just as she finished explaining the thermal dynamics of the cooling system to a group of fascinated automotive engineers. Brilliant as always, he murmured as the group dispersed to examine the working prototype that had been set up in the adjacent lab. I couldn't have done any of this without your support, she replied, but he shook his head. You could have done this anywhere with anyone willing to give you the resources and freedom you needed. What makes me proud isn't just what you've accomplished, it's that you chose to accomplish it here with me. Their relationship had evolved over the months into something that balanced professional partnership with personal intimacy in ways that surprised them both. They had learned to separate their roles as business partners from their roles as romantic partners, but they had also discovered that the best aspects of each relationship reinforced the other. There's something I want to discuss with you, Aaliyah said, lowering her voice as more people approached to congratulate her on the presentation. About the next phase of our work. What do you have in mind? I want to accelerate the talent identification program we talked about. The Overlooked Genius Initiative. Her eyes lit up with the same intensity she had shown when explaining her motor design. I think we're ready to scale it up and make it a central part of Mitchell Technologies' mission. Jonathan felt his pulse quicken. They had discussed the program many times, but always as a future possibility, something they would tackle once the motor technology was established. Hearing her talk about it now, with the confidence of someone who had proven that unconventional approaches could yield extraordinary results, made it feel suddenly urgent and achievable. Tell me more, he said. I want to create a network of talent scouts who look for brilliance in unexpected places. Homeless shelters, community colleges, maker spaces, online forums, anywhere that passionate, capable people might be working on problems without institutional support. Aaliyah's voice grew more excited as she outlined her vision. We provide them with resources, mentorship, and opportunities to develop their ideas. No traditional credentials required, no background checks, no assumptions about what success should look like. That's a massive undertaking, Jonathan pointed out, though his tone suggested he was already thinking about logistics rather than expressing doubt. Yes, it is. But think about what we could accomplish if we found even a dozen people with the kind of overlooked potential that led to what you've seen here today. Aaliyah gestured toward the lab where people were still examining her prototype. Think about the innovations we might discover, the problems we might solve, the lives we might change. Jonathan looked around the room at the excitement and interest her work had generated, then back at her face, which was radiant with the possibility of expanding their impact beyond anything they had originally envisioned. How soon do you want to start? He asked. How soon can we start? Well, Jonathan said, pulling out his phone to check his calendar. I have a board meeting next week where we're discussing strategic initiatives for next year. How would you feel about presenting this idea to our investors and directors? Aaliyah's smile was answer enough, but she said it anyway. I'd feel like we were about to change the world. Spring had arrived in the city, and Aaliyah found herself walking through the company's rooftop garden during her lunch break, enjoying the way the afternoon sun felt on her face. It was almost exactly 1 year since that morning when she had woken up under a highway bridge, and the contrast felt surreal enough to make her occasionally wonder if she was living in some elaborate dream. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jonathan. Meet me in the garden when you get a chance. I have something to show you. She looked around and spotted him near the far corner of the garden, standing beside what appeared to be a small table covered with a white cloth. As she approached, she could see that he looked nervous in a way she had rarely observed, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that seemed almost vulnerable. What's all this? She asked, noting the careful arrangement of items on the table. A celebration, Jonathan replied, pulling out a chair for her. And a conversation I've been wanting to have for a while now. Aaliyah sat down and watched as he uncovered the table, revealing 2 glasses of champagne and a small wrapped package that immediately caught her attention. But before she could ask about it, he pulled out another item that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a framed photograph of her Koenigsegg repair from that first day, taken from his phone and printed in high resolution. She could see herself in the image, bent over the engine with her flashlight in hand, completely absorbed in solving the problem. But what struck her most was the expression on Jonathan's face in the background, a mixture of skepticism, desperation, and something that might have been the beginning of admiration. "Where did you get this?" she asked, running her fingers along the frame. "I took it while you were working. I don't know why, maybe because the whole situation seemed so impossible that I wanted to document it." Jonathan sat down across from her, his eyes focused on the photograph. "I look at this picture now and I can see the exact moment when my life started changing direction." "Just your life?" Aaliyah asked with a smile. "Well, both our lives, obviously. But I was thinking about what you said that day, about how sometimes you make all the right choices and still lose everything." Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand. "I think maybe sometimes you make what seems like the wrong choice, trusting a stranger, taking a risk, opening yourself up to possibilities you never considered, and that's when you find everything you didn't know you were missing." Aaliyah felt warmth spread through her chest, the same feeling she had experienced during their late-night conversation in the lab, but stronger now, more certain. The past year had shown her that the connection between them wasn't just professional admiration or physical attraction, it was something deeper and more stable, built on shared values and mutual respect and genuine affection for who they were as complete people. "There's something I need to tell you," Jonathan continued, his nervousness becoming more apparent. "The board approved your talent program proposal unanimously. Full funding, dedicated staff, and carte blanche to implement it however you think best." "That's wonderful," Aaliyah said, though she could tell from his expression that there was more to the story. "What aren't you telling me? They also want to expand it internationally. Offices in 12 cities across 4 continents, partnerships with universities and community organizations worldwide, and a budget that's frankly bigger than I expected them to approve." Jonathan paused, watching her reaction carefully. "It's going to require someone to oversee the entire operation. Someone with the vision and the credibility to make it work on that scale." The implications hit Aaliyah immediately. Leading a program of that magnitude would mean travel, responsibility, and visibility on a level she had never imagined. It would also mean stepping fully into the role she had been preparing for without realizing it, becoming not just an engineer or an executive, but a genuine advocate for systemic change in how talent is identified and nurtured. "Are you asking me to take on that responsibility?" she said. "I'm asking you to take on whatever responsibility feels right to you. If you want to focus on the technical work, we can hire someone else to run the program. If you want to lead the global initiative, we'll restructure the company to support that. If you want to do something completely different, we'll figure out how to make that work too." Jonathan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "What I'm really asking is whether you want to build a life together that's big enough to hold all the possibilities we can imagine." The words hung in the air between them, and Aaliyah felt her heart begin to race as she understood what he was really saying. This wasn't just about business partnerships or career opportunities, it was about the kind of future they wanted to create together as partners in every sense of the word. "Jonathan," she began, then stopped as he picked up the small wrapped package from the table. "Before you answer," he said, "there's one more thing." He handed her the package and she could feel her hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a small velvet box that could only contain one thing, but when she opened it, she found something she hadn't expected. It wasn't an engagement ring, but rather a beautiful pendant necklace featuring a tiny, perfect replica of an electric motor, crafted in silver with intricate detail that captured the essence of her revolutionary design. "It's beautiful," she breathed, examining the craftsmanship. "But I thought." "I know what you thought," Jonathan said with a smile. "And we'll get to that. But first, I wanted to give you something that represents what brought us together, what we've built together, and what we're going to accomplish together. Your innovation, our partnership, and the future we're creating." He stood up and moved around the table, taking the necklace from her hands and fastening it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin as he worked the clasp, and she felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "Now," he said, returning to his chair, "about that other question." "What other question?" Aaliyah asked, though her pulse was racing because she knew exactly what he meant. "The one I've been wanting to ask since that night in the lab when you told me you believed in what we were building together." Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another small box, this one clearly containing the ring she had expected to find in the first package. Aaliyah Jackson, brilliant engineer, business partner, and the woman who taught me that the best things in life come from taking risks on people others overlook. Will you marry me? The question she had been half expecting still caught her completely off guard in the best possible way. As she looked into his eyes, she saw all the same things that had drawn her to him from the beginning: intelligence, integrity, ambition, but also something new. She saw love, genuine and deep and uncomplicated by the power dynamics that had once made her hesitate. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger and more certain than she had expected. Yes, to the marriage, to the global program, to building something bigger than either of us could create alone. Jonathan's face broke into the same radiant smile she had seen the day she first accepted his job offer. But this time it was even brighter, reflecting not just professional satisfaction but personal joy. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple but elegant design that somehow perfectly reflected her taste despite the fact that they had never discussed jewelry preferences, Aaliyah found herself thinking about the journey that had led to this moment. The losses that had seemed like endings had actually been beginnings. The risks that had felt dangerous had turned out to be the safest choices she could have made. I love you, she said, the words feeling both new and familiar, as if she had been waiting her whole life to say them to the right person. I love you too, Jonathan replied, leaning across the table to kiss her. And I can't wait to see what we accomplish together. The auditorium at the International Conference on Emerging Technologies was packed beyond capacity, with additional screens set up in overflow rooms to accommodate the unprecedented interest in Aaliyah's keynote presentation. She stood backstage, adjusting the silver motor pendant that had become her signature piece of jewelry, and took a deep breath as she prepared to address the largest audience of her career. 5 minutes to showtime, the stage manager announced, and Aaliyah felt the familiar flutter of nerves that always preceded major presentations. But underneath the nervousness was a steady current of excitement about sharing her work with the global engineering community. Jonathan appeared at her side, as he always did before her important presentations, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the supportive smile that had become one of her favorite sights in the world. How are you feeling? He asked, handing her one of the cups. Ready, she replied, and realized as she said it that it was completely true. The past year had prepared her for this moment in ways she was only beginning to understand. Actually, I'm more than ready. I'm excited to show them what's possible when you stop limiting yourself to conventional thinking. The introduction began, and Aaliyah listened as the conference organizer recited her accomplishments to the audience. Chief Innovation Officer at Mitchell Technologies, holder of 17 patents in advanced motor design, recipient of the Young Engineer of the Year award, and architect of the Global Talent Initiative that had already identified and supported over 200 overlooked innovators worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Aaliyah Jackson. She walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, her confidence growing with each step. The bright lights prevented her from seeing most of the audience, but she could feel their attention and interest as a palpable force. 2 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. I was homeless, sleeping under a highway bridge with $90,000 in student debt and no prospects for employment in my field. Today I'm standing before you as proof that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. The auditorium fell silent, the unexpected opening having captured everyone's complete attention. Aaliyah had debated whether to share her personal story so directly, but she had decided that authenticity was more important than maintaining a polished professional image. The technology I'm about to show you wasn't developed in a traditional corporate research lab by engineers with impeccable credentials and decades of experience. It was developed by someone who learned to see problems differently because she had to solve them with limited resources and unconventional approaches. She clicked to her first slide, showing the side-by-side comparison between traditional motor cooling systems and her integrated design. But before I show you what's possible when we expand our definition of where innovation comes from, let me tell you about the day this all began. Aaliyah told the story of the broken Koenigsegg, the skeptical billionaire, and the homeless engineer who saw solutions where others saw only problems. She talked about taking risks on people, about recognizing potential in unexpected places, and about the innovations that emerge when brilliant minds are given resources and support regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. The motor technology you're about to see performs 40% better than anything currently in production, she continued, advancing through slides that showed performance data and real-world testing results. But more importantly, it represents a new approach to innovation, one that values problem-solving ability over pedigree, creativity over convention, and potential over past achievements. The technical demonstration that followed was met with audible gasps and sustained applause as she showed video footage of her motors powering everything from electric bicycles to cargo ships, performing in conditions that would disable conventional systems. The applications extend far beyond transportation, Aaliyah explained, showing slides of renewable energy installations, manufacturing equipment, and aerospace systems that had been revolutionized by her cooling technology. When you fundamentally improve the efficiency and reliability of electric motors, you impact every industry that depends on mechanical power. But the most dramatic moment came when she announced the expansion of the Global Talent Initiative. The screen behind her filled with photographs and brief biographies of the innovators they had discovered and supported. A former gang member in Detroit who had developed revolutionary battery chemistry, a refugee in Berlin who had created more efficient solar panel designs, a college dropout in Mumbai who had solved critical problems in water purification. Each of these individuals represents potential that was being overlooked by traditional hiring practices and educational systems, Aaliyah said. Each of them is now contributing to technological advances that are making the world more sustainable, more efficient, and more equitable. She paused, looking out at the audience, knowing that many of them were decision makers who could multiply the impact of what she was proposing. I'm announcing today that Mitchell Technologies, in partnership with leading universities and technology companies worldwide, is committing $500 million over the next 5 years to expand the Global Talent Initiative. We're going to establish innovation centers in 50 cities, create pathways for unconventional talent to access resources and opportunities, and fundamentally change how our industries identify and develop the next generation of breakthrough technologies. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Aaliyah wasn't finished. I'm also announcing that this initiative will be guided by a simple principle. Talent and brilliance are distributed equally across all populations, but opportunity is not. Our job is to fix that imbalance, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because our future depends on harnessing every available source of human creativity and problem-solving ability. As she concluded her presentation, Aaliyah felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a broken car on a highway had led to this moment, where she could stand before the world's leading engineers and technology leaders and advocate for the same kind of opportunity that had transformed her own life. The standing ovation continued for several minutes, and as she left the stage, Aaliyah was immediately surrounded by conference attendees eager to discuss partnerships, collaborations, and ways to support the Global Talent Initiative. But the conversation that mattered most was with the familiar figure waiting for her in the wings. How did it feel? Jonathan asked, his pride evident in every word. Like we just changed the conversation about innovation for an entire industry, Aaliyah replied, still energized by the audience's response. Like we just made it impossible for anyone to ignore the potential that's been overlooked for decades. Speaking of changing conversations, Jonathan said, pulling out his phone to show her the social media feeds that were already lighting up with clips from her presentation. I think you might want to see this. The hashtag talent everywhere was trending globally, with thousands of engineers, students, and innovators sharing their own stories of overlooked potential and unconventional paths to success. Comments poured in from people offering to support the Global Talent Initiative, from others sharing their own breakthrough technologies, and from individuals who had been inspired to pursue their own innovative ideas. We did it, Aaliyah said softly, watching the real-time response to her presentation. We actually started a movement. You did it, Jonathan corrected gently. I just provided the platform. The vision, the technology, the courage to stand up there and challenge an entire industry that was all you. As they walked together toward the reception where Aaliyah would spend the next several hours discussing partnerships and opportunities with industry leaders, she found herself thinking about the ripple effects that would flow from this moment. Somewhere in the world, a brilliant mind working in obscurity would hear about the Global Talent Initiative and find the courage to reach out for support. Somewhere else, a company executive would reconsider their hiring practices or investment priorities. And somewhere, a young person who had been told their unconventional background disqualified them from technological innovation would see her story and decide to pursue their dreams anyway. But as important as those future impacts were, what mattered most to her in this moment was the hand holding hers, the partner who had seen potential where others saw only problems, and the love that had grown from mutual respect into something that made every success feel more meaningful and every challenge feel surmountable. Ready for the next phase? Jonathan asked as they approached the reception. With you? I'm ready for anything, Aaliyah replied, and meant every word. The wedding took place on a perfect Saturday morning in late spring, in the rooftop garden where Jonathan had proposed 18 months earlier. The guest list was a reflection of the journey that had brought them together. Family members, company executives, engineers from around the world, and dozens of individuals whose lives had been changed by the Global Talent Initiative. Aaliyah stood at the altar wearing a dress that perfectly balanced elegance with her practical sensibilities, her silver motor pendant visible above the neckline as a symbol of everything that had led to this moment. As she looked out at the assembled guests, she saw faces that told the story of transformation and possibility that had become the central narrative of her new life. There was Rebecca Torres, who had become her closest friend and collaborator in implementing the Global Talent Initiative. Thomas Chin, whose initial skepticism had evolved into deep professional respect and personal affection. The refugees, former gang members, college dropouts, and other unconventional innovators who had become successful engineers, entrepreneurs, and inventors through the program she had created. But most importantly, there was Jonathan, standing beside her with an expression of joy and love that made everything else fade into the background. "We are gathered here today," the officiant began, "to celebrate not just the union of two individuals, but the partnership that has already changed countless lives and promises to change countless more." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, incorporating elements that reflected both their personal journey and their shared commitment to innovation and social change. Instead of traditional vows, they had written promises that spoke to their professional partnership as well as their personal relationship. "I promise," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt, "to continue seeing potential where others see problems, to keep taking risks on people and possibilities that others overlook, and to build with you a future that's bigger and better than anything either of us could create alone." "I promise," Jonathan replied, "to keep providing platforms for brilliance to flourish, to never stop learning from people whose experiences are different from my own, and to love and support you through every innovation, every challenge, and every dream we haven't even imagined yet." The kiss that sealed their marriage was met with enthusiastic applause and cheers from guests who had witnessed not just a wedding, but the formal recognition of a partnership that had already proven its power to change the world. The reception that followed was held in the company's main conference center, transformed for the occasion into a celebration space that showcased some of the technologies and innovations that had emerged from their collaborative work. Interactive displays demonstrated the latest applications of Aaliyah's motor technology, while video presentations highlighted success stories from Global Talent Initiative participants around the world. But the most significant moment came during the speeches, when Aaliyah took the microphone to address their guests. "2.5 years ago," she began, "I thought my life was over. I had lost everything I thought defined me: my family, my home, my career prospects, and my belief that talent and hard work would be rewarded. I was sleeping under a bridge, invisible to a world that had decided I had nothing valuable to offer." She paused, looking directly at Jonathan before continuing. "Then I met a man whose car had broken down on a highway. A man who was arrogant enough to think he could solve any problem with money and connections, but humble enough to accept help from someone he had initially dismissed. A man who saw potential where others saw only problems, who was willing to take risks on people rather than just on technologies." The audience was completely silent, captivated by the story many of them had heard before but never in this context. That chance encounter led to everything you see around you today. The motor technology that's revolutionizing transportation and renewable energy. The Global Talent Initiative that has provided opportunities to thousands of overlooked innovators. The company culture that values problem-solving ability over pedigree, creativity over convention. Aaliyah's voice grew stronger as she moved toward her conclusion. "But most importantly, it led to a partnership that has taught me that the best innovations come not from individual brilliance, but from collaboration between people who complement each other's strengths and support each other through challenges. Jonathan didn't save me, we saved each other. And together, we've been able to save opportunities for countless other people who just needed someone to believe in their potential." The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Aaliyah held up her hand to indicate she wasn't finished. "I have one final announcement to make," she said, and something in her tone suggested this was significant. "Next month, we're launching the most ambitious expansion of the Global Talent Initiative yet. We're establishing a fund that will provide not just opportunities, but startup capital for innovators who want to create their own companies and solutions." She clicked a remote, and the screens around the room displayed detailed information about the new initiative. $1 billion distributed over 10 years, specifically designated for unconventional entrepreneurs who have been overlooked by traditional venture capital. No MBA required. No previous startup experience necessary. No network connections demanded. Just brilliant ideas, demonstrated problem-solving ability, and the commitment to make the world better through innovation. The announcement was met with gasps and excited murmurs as guests began to understand the magnitude of what she was proposing. This wasn't just about providing jobs, it was about creating an entire ecosystem of innovation that operated outside traditional gatekeeping mechanisms. Are you inspired by this transformation from homeless to changemaker? Subscribe and tell me in the comments which part of Aaliyah's journey resonated most with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can support overlooked talent in our own communities. The fund will be administered jointly by Mitchell Technologies and the Aaliyah Jackson Foundation, she continued, with advisory input from successful entrepreneurs who themselves came from unconventional backgrounds. We're not just providing money, we're providing mentorship, resources, and access to networks that can turn innovative ideas into world-changing realities. As she concluded her speech and returned to Jonathan's side, Aaliyah felt a profound sense of satisfaction that went beyond personal happiness. The scared, desperate woman who had offered to fix a stranger's car had evolved into someone who could create opportunities for thousands of other overlooked individuals to transform their lives and their communities. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, conversations about new partnerships and collaborations, and dancing to music that ranged from classical to hip-hop, reflecting the diverse backgrounds of their guests. But the moment that Aaliyah would remember most clearly came near midnight, when she and Jonathan found themselves alone on the rooftop garden where their relationship had first moved beyond professional collaboration. Any regrets? Jonathan asked, pulling her close as they swayed to music that drifted up from the reception below. Only that it took a car breakdown to bring us together, Aaliyah replied with a smile. I wish we could have met under circumstances where I didn't have to prove my worth by fixing your expensive mistakes. Maybe, Jonathan said thoughtfully, but I think we met exactly when and how we were supposed to. You needed someone willing to take a risk on unconventional talent. I needed someone who could show me that the most important innovations come from seeing problems differently. Neither of us was ready for this partnership before we had learned the lessons that prepared us for it. Aaliyah considered this as they continued dancing, thinking about all the experiences both positive and negative that had shaped who they had become. The business failure that had cost her family everything had also taught her resilience and resourcefulness. The years of homelessness had been painful, but they had also given her empathy and perspective that informed everything she did now. Even Jonathan's initial arrogance and assumptions had been necessary parts of his journey toward becoming someone who could truly value unconventional talent. You're right, she said finally. We had to become who we needed to be before we could build what we were meant to build together. As the music faded and the last guest departed, Aaliyah and Jonathan stood together looking out at the city lights, contemplating the future they would create as partners in every sense of the word. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new innovations that they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found in each other not just love, but the kind of collaboration that makes impossible things possible. The homeless woman and the arrogant billionaire had both disappeared, replaced by partners who understood that the best solutions come from combining different perspectives, taking risks on overlooked potential, and refusing to accept that things have to remain the way they've always been. Their story was far from over, it was just beginning.